All right, we have a lot to cover today, so I'm going to head and get started. Good afternoon and welcome to Built-in's panel discussion, AEO and GEO for talent leaders. I'm Lindsay Deckert. I'm the VP of Marketing here at Built-in, and like many of you, I've been trying to navigate this really rapidly changing world of reputation and visibility in AI for the last 18 plus months. And I'm really excited today to dig in with our experts. Before we do that, I just want to go over a couple of housekeeping notes. You will be muted throughout today's webinar, but if you have questions, comments, insights, please share them in the chat. We'll be answering questions that you all submitted ahead of the panel discussion today, but if anything comes up along the way, we'll do our best to answer those at the end. And then later this afternoon, we'll send you the recording so that you can have access to it after the call. Before we go into meeting our panelists, I did want to provide just a little bit of information on Built-in. Built-in is the industry's first employer intelligence and activation platform. We help companies understand, improve, and amplify their employer visibility and reputation across search and AI so that they can optimize every stage of their talent funnel. And for those of you who have known Built-in for a while, this represents an evolution in both our business and your industry. Built-in started as a local recruitment hub. We grew into a global recruitment platform. And now what we're really doing is helping companies hire top talent by following the candidates who are moving into this AI first candidate journey that we're going to talk a lot about today. And we'll talk more about that with our experts who I'd love to introduce you to now. First up, our panelists today are Adam Kalika. He is Built-in's co-founder and senior vice president of product and growth. Adam leads a team of AEO and GEO experts here at Built-in who are helping our clients improve their employer reputation and visibility every day. We also have with us today Maureen Strupp, Built-in senior director of go-to-market strategy. Maureen and her team speak with hundreds of clients every month, talent and employer brand professionals just like you, to understand how this new candidate journey is changing the way they work with Built-in, and how we can help them improve. Welcome to both of you. Before we do our first question, I'd like to start with a quick poll and ask you all a question. First, I'd like to know, how do all of you think candidates are using AI currently in their job search? We'll leave you a minute to select your answer, but Adam, I'd love to get your perspective on that. How are candidates using AI today?
Hi, everyone. So the short answer, and the reason why all of you here today is, and many of you know, that candidates are using it across the entire journey. So that's from discovering companies, trying to find who are the best employers in their local area and their specific niche. They're researching employers. They're looking up what their leadership is like, what the compensation is like, what the company culture is like. And of course, they're using it to find jobs and decide whether or not they should apply in the first place. And then before they come to interviews with you, of course, they're using it to prepare for interviews. And then all the way at the end, when they're deciding between two offers, they're using AI to compare offers. They're probably loading both offers up into Claude, deciding is offer A or B better, or if they only have one offer, they're asking, is this a good offer? Is this a fair offer? Should I negotiate? So ultimately, it's affecting the whole funnel end to end. And the data that we have says the same thing. So when we look at a recent survey, it said that 96% said they'd used AI to research employers, learn about a role, or prepare for the interview. It's just about everybody. And 72% of people said they've used AI before deciding whether or not to apply. So ultimately, the big takeaway is that it's really reached the point now that it's affecting the entire candidate journey end to end.
And just to jump in there really quickly too, Lindsay, sorry, saw you go off mute there, but thought I would jump in. It's crazy to think, I think you probably all talk about this on a regular basis of how much our world is evolving with AI as talent leaders and experts. But I remember back to a year ago, the number one thing we were hearing from our customers at the time was that candidates were using AI just to build their resume. And then I talked to a customer this morning that she believes 100% of the candidates that they are talking to are using AI at every point in the funnel. So you think about that evolution from just a year ago of how we were talking about how AI was helping with resumes to now it really being a thought partner and decision engine, I think is really powerful.
And Mo, it's funny you say that because that's exactly what our poll results showed. You all just shared that you're seeing it in every single one of those options that we gave you. They're using it across the entire journey. They're using it for all sorts of different problems to solve in their candidate journeys. I think for the purposes of our conversation today, we're going to focus on what's happening, especially in those areas of reputation and visibility. So, Adam, next up, I want to get an understanding of how can a company know if they're showing up, how well they're showing up. What is AI saying about them today?
So I think to start off with today, and it'll be important for a lot of the questions later on in the Q&A, that you have to look at it in two big buckets. So the first big bucket is my reputation. So reputation is, what does AI say about me? So this is when people say, hey, what's it like working at Pepsi? What's the culture like I was mentioning earlier. So think about that as your reputation, how AI responds to questions about just you, your specific company, and what that sentiment is. I won't go into too long of detail of how you can do that. Of course, you could do it yourself in ChatGPT, Claude, or any of those places. The truth is, if you're a built-in client, you already have that. You already have your reputation. And if you're not a built-in client, my recommendation is you can go to builtin.com, click for employers, and then you'll get a free reputation report. When we run that report for you, we ask LLMs, the most popular LLMs, all the most common candidate questions across kind of all the key segments. That's the quick way to get a good pulse on your reputation. From there on out, that's kind of your company holistically. We'll talk a little bit more later, but you also really want to drill down as you start thinking about how AI actually helps you with your hiring goals. You want to think about more about what's my reputation for a specific location or specific role or a specific team. We'll go deeper on that now. But for anyone who's new, that's kind of the key bucket. One key bucket is reputation. And when you're looking at those, you'll get scores back from built-in. Really what I would say is whether you use built-in or you're doing it yourself in ChatGPT, you're really looking for themes. And so the goal is to say, what are the themes that are showing up consistently? And I would ask, the questions you want to ask is, are those themes fair? Are they accurate? Are they based on outdated information? Does that conflict with what we know to be true? So those are the kind of the questions I would start asking.
Great. And Maureen, is there anything that you can share on how clients are actually thinking about reputation and the reports that they've been seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to understanding your reputation as a company, the way that we like to think about it is our reputation reports really give you an idea of your AI and search footprint and allow you to maintain a pulse on how you're being perceived to candidates. So that can be coming from a mix of sources that you control, like your career site, or it can be summarizing what I like to call the chatter that's out there about your company. Just to give you like a real world example of this, one of our customers recently flagged to us that they redid their comp plan for their sales team. We all know salespeople like to chat. So there was a lot of chatter out there about this new comp plan. And all of this surfaced in their reputation report that was coming back around their comp and benefits. And then what we do, and we'll get into a little bit later, is give you the opportunity to control that narrative a little bit more so that what's coming up in search and LLMs is not just from uncontrolled third party sources.
And that makes sense when a company knows who I am. But Adam, how will a company find me in the first place? How do I get found to know what that reputation is going to say?
Sure, the second kind of key aspect, if you think about AEO, GEO, AI search as it relates to your brand, is visibility. You'll probably hear us use visibility and discoverability a little bit interchangeably, but ultimately, this is when candidates are at the top of the funnel. They're not looking specifically for your brand. So they might be, let's say they're an AI engineer in San Francisco, and they might specifically be interested in the fintech industry. So they might ask a question like you see there, what are the best fintech companies hiring for engineers? And so that is all about being found when they don't know about you. And so the way to really think about this or how you should care about the visibility is really two parts. So the first part is thinking about roles and teams. So what are my high priority roles? What are my high priority teams? That trying to hire for, and you would construct kind of repeatable prompts and questions that touch on those things. So if you're, for example, you're in New York and you're in the fintech industry, things you would want to use is actually probably working in the fintech industry to those, because I know a lot of you in the fintech industry care specifically about getting talent or attracting talent who has an industry experience or is looking for you. So you might ask the question is, what are the best fintech companies? If you're in a really niche industry and you don't necessarily think someone is going to be looking for you, you might simply ask questions such as, what are the best companies hiring for AI engineers, or whatever that is for your company? It could be, manufacturing engineers, et cetera. So this is kind of how you would start crafting those repeatable prompt sets around your high priority roles. And what you're looking for is relatively simple. Am I showing up? Is my company there? And if my company's there, am I kind of in one of the prominent results? So that's kind of one key piece of discovery. The second key piece of sorry, go ahead.
No, please, please.
Sorry, the second key piece of discovery that I would think about this is when you're trying to find out if you're visible, is to think about your industry. And that can be two things. So it can be if you're a company with a long history, let's say you're a financial services company. What you'd want to know is in the locations I care about or the countries I care about, am I visible for my industry? And then if you're have an aspirational industry, let's say you're a financial services company that's transitioning to be a fintech company, you'd also want to research that. So what are the top fintech companies in my city? And so you can craft a set of repeatable prompts like that, and you can run those in ChatGPT, Gemini, Google, and that's how you might get a general baseline sense of visibility. Sorry, go ahead, Lindsay.
No, I was just going to say, you're mentioning a lot of tools. You're mentioning I need to track roles. I need to track geos. What platforms do I need to care about all of this on?
Great question. So one quick note before we talk about the platforms we need to care about. For anyone who's a built-in customer, over the coming months, we're rolling out visibility reporting. So even though I talked about those prompts, I think those, if you're not a customer and you're considering how can I just do this on my own, that's my recommendation. If you're a built-in customer, you'll work with your CM account manager to establish what your goals are, and we'll help guide you on those aspects. But that's a great question. What platform should I care about? When I'm thinking about this, the short answer is you should care about all the major ones. So maybe that sounds overwhelming, or that's the bad news. That's because candidates really, they use a mix of everything: ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, Google AIOs, etc. The mix, it definitely varies by audience, market, country, but the big ones here that you see in the US are kind of the ones that are generally popular everywhere. Maybe there are some niche ones, there might be exceptions if you're hiring like in China or Russia, but generally like the big ones that you know about and use here are what's used around the world. But kind of the good news about that, when you think about the first question is like, what platform should I care about? Even though I would say generally you need to care about all of them, the good news is from like a practical perspective, if you're asking, what do I do? You're not going to create a ChatGPT strategy, a Copilot strategy, a Gemini strategy. You're going to create one comprehensive strategy.
That makes sense. And then, Maureen, do you have a read on how candidates are thinking about these tools?
Yeah, we get asked this a lot with our customer base, and I do think it's important to realize that there is a difference between oftentimes what candidates use for work versus personal. So, for example, I'm actively interviewing for my team right now, and I interviewed a candidate this week that uses Copilot in his current role. But when I asked him about his prep for the interview, he said he used ChatGPT for all of the prep. And I'll also say that Google is still a very much relied on search platform for personal research. In fact, it's still actually the most used with 2 billion monthly users a month. But the difference with Google now and Gemini here is that oftentimes any questions are responded to with Gemini with that AI overview instead of those traditional search results. So oftentimes we hear from candidates that they're using like Copilot or Claude in their role, but personally they're doing using ChatGPT, or Claude is coming up now more, and then obviously still Google.
All right. So a lot of platforms to pay attention to. Help us all understand, what are the platforms listening to? Where are they getting their information? What sources are showing up?
Generally, the platforms, they're looking for credible third-party sources. And when you think two parts, when you think about third-party sources and when you think about also your own content, they really value the same fundamental things. They like accurate information, current information. They like information that's very specific. They like sources that are credible. And so that kind of spans all of them. And so we have some interesting data here. Um, if you think about what are the most important sources, I'll add the caveat here that this also varies by industry. And the data set you're looking here is the built-in customer base. We've created a tremendous amount of content on both the reputation and visibility side. And so all these cases you see, number one, built in, really this is our candidates. We are one of the largest sources out there in this world too. But I'll of course add that caveat. So the picture is like slightly different for reputation than it is visibility. So in the chart you see there, reputation, again, those are like, what's it like to work at Pepsi? How are the managers there? When you look there, the top 5 are, built in. Indeed, Glassdoor, LinkedIn, Comparably would be the 5th one. I know folks ask a lot about Reddit. Reddit doesn't come up too high when it comes to that side. For some employers, especially on the tech side, you'll see like really significant chatter and threads in Reddit. And so your mileage may vary. But when we look at an aggregate level for reputation, those are the big 5. When it comes to visibility, it's a little bit different there. Key differences probably you'll see right away would be that Glassdoor is not in the top 5 for visibility. LinkedIn is much more prominent in visibility. Indeed is prominent as well. And then it's not listed here, but ZipRecruiter is up there too, as well as Reddit. So the blend changes a little bit there. But I think what I would say is maybe the other kind of key distinction with the visibility, and many of you have noticed this if you've kind of researched yourself or researched the industry you care about, you'll see a much broader set when it comes to visibility. And so you'll see a lot more media platforms, award platforms. So for those of you that invest very heavily in awards programs, a lot of that will shine through more on the visibility side than it does on the reputation side. That's companies that publish best companies list. LinkedIn, of course, does these as well too. You see Forbes and Fortune do that well. So you'll see a greater variety on the visibility side than the reputation side. It's a much smaller pool impacting that.
Great. And I think probably a lot of our listeners have spent a lot of time participating in creating employer brand content. Where does that fit into all of this?
Yep. So I guess the first thing that I would say is that AI doesn't really distinguish or draw a difference between employer brand content and what you might just call any other company content. At the end of the day, it's ultimately looking for credible information, and anywhere I can find it. So the way we say to think about this, though, when you think about how do I impact my reputation, how should I think about this? The best case scenario is that your employer, your career site serves as the kind of the source of truth. And it establishes a lot of those facts that you want AI and, of course, candidates to understand. That's not a requirement. I know for some teams, it can be really challenging to get resources to update their career sites, and there's a lot more there. But in the perfect world, you would start with your career site, use that as a source of record, and then really, when you talk about proof, that is kind of corroborating the information that's on your career site in other places. And so, if AI sees one theme on your career site, and then it sees it in multiple other places, let's say it sees it on built-in as well, that kind of reinforces that the theme is credible, and the AI gets confident that, oh, okay, this is a kind of a recurring theme about them. And that's really what it's looking for. It's looking for third parties to validate and echo that message. And that can exist in a variety of ways. That can be having excellent company profile, providing company insights, creating company stories in a nice structured manner. And that's a really key part of it. The last kind of thing too, when you think about that, or what I want to make clear is, it's not necessarily about kind of establishing like a set of fact patterns on your career site and then just having it verbatim, the exact same copy everywhere. You want them to be authentic things. You want them to be credible. You want them to be fact-based, but they don't need to be completely identical. AI, one of its greatest kind of strengths is parsing through different themes. So I think the big takeaway here is AI is looking for kind of consistency more than it is duplication. And if you can, try to make your career sites kind of a key foundation of that.
Great. And Maureen, how are we helping customers figure out where to start? Because it sounds a little daunting, right? With all these different things that need to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. To Adam's point, we talk a lot about the career site really being foundational for our customers and making sure they have the most up-to-date content on there. We know career sites sometimes can get fallen back to the back burner, but that way, from a fact perspective, AI is pulling the most up-to-date information. But from there, we work with our customers to create quarterly content plans that align to both visibility and reputation goals. So once we've established this like fact-based foundation on your career site, you've built out your built-in profile with additional fact-based information that corroborates what's on your career site. We then will spread out your content opportunities through built-in on a quarterly basis to make sure that there's, again, those themes that are consistently surfacing for LLMs and search. But then also freshness matters. So having new and relevant content based on those themes that are recent for the LLMs to pull as well. So that's really how we approach it. And again, we address both reputation and visibility with that content.
Great. And I guess, Adam, you helped us understand the difference between reputation and visibility and how they're related. But I think it seems hard to show up. Why is it so hard to show up in these queries and be visible in these moments?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a question a lot of customers ask. It's a lot of questions. It's a question a lot of marketers ask every day too. So with reputation, you can control a lot more. That so much of that is fact-based, and so we talked about really kind of establishing that fact base and making sure it's spread out everywhere. And so for those of you who have been working on this for, let's say, the last year or even the last several months, you'll have seen, oh, I'm starting to see a lot of that content I create show up in a reputation, and that's great. For folks that start working on visibility, they've noticed that's a bit harder, and they're not necessarily the same thing. And so the reason that I would say that visibility is harder is a good reputation is necessary, but it's not always sufficient. So AI not only does it want the facts, but it requires a bit of independent evidence. So discovery, it often requires someone else to connect those dots. And so really AI is looking for recommenders, and that might come from editorial coverage, that comes from award sites, industry recognition, right? Being considered one of the, let's say the top fintech companies or those sort of things. All of that and trusted third-party platforms like Built-in contribute to that. So to say that back, reputation is key, and to be visible, you really want a good reputation, but it's an and statement. You also need people to recommend you and recognize you to be discovered.
Okay, so that all fits together pretty nicely, but I have to ask the question, what about review sites? Because I know those probably are a source for these tools. What are they doing to change this narrative?
Yep. So a not uncommon question, I think, is someone goes to research themselves, and Glassdoor will show up, or they look in our reports and they see Glassdoor there. And so one of the first kind of questions that people will ask is, how do I make Glassdoor show up less? And so you can't tell AI platforms not to cite Glassdoor or to cite it less. You can't suppress the citations or the uses or they use directly. Really, the goal is to create stronger alternative narratives. And that goes back to everything that you give AI, it wants things that are current, it wants things that are credible. And again, you can include this in your career site, a mix of third-party sources like Built-in. We'll touch on LinkedIn a little bit. There's a question there later. So you want to, as I mentioned earlier, you really want to take the motions of creating that content, making sure it's echoed everywhere. And so if you focus on that, naturally you will see the sources, as you put more content out there, you will see a greater diversity, and you'll see them see the mix reduce. That's not to say I would never tell someone that Glassdoor will fully ever disappear. Like it is a prominent place and it's a prominent review site, so you always see it in the mix. But if for your specific company there are themes that you don't like in there and they are recurring, really the solution is to worry a little bit less about Glassdoor and focus more on giving AI good content to replace it.
So would it be beneficial or effective to do a big push for my employees to submit reviews to Glassdoor?
So that's a good question. So that comes up too, which is, should we just do like a huge review drive and kind of try to flood the zone with positive reviews? If you're a medium and large size, well, if you're somewhere between like a medium to large size company, it's probably not a great core strategy. You could do a short burst of new reviews. Generally, that will be diluted more by the larger history that you have there. And certainly it can add some fresh perspective, but it's just not like a good long-term effective strategy. And I think as many of you will know from like a practical perspective, it can be hard to get everyone to kind of collectively do that. And sometimes you don't like the content that you get. So for medium and large size companies, it's ultimately not a great strategy. For smaller companies, that actually can be a little bit different. So when we talk about smaller companies versus large companies, a small company, their reputation is more like a speedboat. A large company, your reputation is like a cruise ship. Speedboat can turn on a dime, cruise ship really slow. When there's not a ton of information about you, if you're a smaller company, generally what you'll see is you'll see anything you put out there come back pretty quickly. And that's true whether it's Glassdoor. So if you're a newer company or 2 or 3 years old, you probably don't have a massive Glassdoor base. And so it can be an important, or it can be an effective strategy there. But I would generally say there's nothing special about Glassdoor for your small company. If you put that same information on your own career site or other trusted third-party sources, you'll get the same impact. But I think your kind of key takeaways would be, you can't force one source out. You really have to create better alternatives. And if you're a smaller company and you have a small existing base of evidence, really just getting information out there about you is important.
Maureen, what do some of those better alternatives look like for our customers?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just to double click on what Adam said, we know that reviews will always be there. And what's actually helpful and what comes up in the reputation reports for our customers is we do surface the themes that come back from those reviews. So that allows our customers to really address head on. Maybe the theme, actually, this is something that came up last week with one of my customers, was their workplace policy. So the theme of, is it remote? Is it flexible? Is it hybrid? There seemed to be mixed messaging across the board in their reviews. So that was something that we then worked with them to really address through fact-based information on their profile about truly what their workplace policy is, and in some FAQs as well, so that they could correct the narrative of what their policy was. So we really give companies the opportunity to own that narrative and counter what might be coming through. And sometimes it can be positive, or reinforce the positive themes that are coming through. So for that same company, while there was a lot of mixed messaging about their workplace policy, one thing that kept coming up was there was great career growth and opportunity at the company. So in that case, we then work with them to create content to really highlight the career growth and opportunities that a candidate would have at the organization, even though they are actually 4 days a week in the office, which might be a trade-off for a candidate. So that's how we look at it. Again, surfacing more of the themes versus like diving into individual reviews, and making recommendations based off that.
Great. So creating those alternatives and also echoing the things that are out there that are positive makes a lot of sense. I know another place a lot of our listeners are going to be spending time and resources and is in their socials. So can we talk a little bit about how LinkedIn content works and appears in these tools?
Yeah, definitely. So talked earlier, the LinkedIn citations are a little bit smaller, and we'll talk a little bit about why. But first, kind of what we see. So when we see for a company, for their reputation, someone's researching them, typically the pages that will show up are LinkedIn Live pages. And really this recommendation goes for whether it's LinkedIn Live, your career site, or anything. The best thing to do if you want to maximize these is use really clear, simple headers. This might sound obvious, right? But if you're talking about what it's like to work in your AI engineering division, use simple headers like AI engineering. When you have your subheaders on a page, talk about what's it like working in AI engineering at my company, or whatever that given role is, or if it's a city, what it's like there. Same thing for your career site. Try to use just really simple headers that just align with what candidates are ultimately asking. They ask about your leadership, your management. And so the advice goes through, if you're trying to make your LinkedIn Live pages show up more, or your career site, simple, well-structured headers that touch on those key topics. Okay, so that's the live pages. The second piece you'll see for a lot of people when you're looking through there is you might see employee posts show up. And so employee posts do show up, and when they do show up, they can be very powerful. The challenge is like consistently getting them into into AI for AI to find them. So they're not surfaced really reliably, and there's not like an amazing way for, let's say, ChatGPT to get access to those. So LinkedIn does not provide a raw feed of, the LinkedIn or the core kind of LinkedIn feed to them. So it can be challenging for them to find them. There certainly are ways they can find them through search. And so the question really is, what I'd say is, if you have really great employee posts about you on LinkedIn, and those people are okay with you sharing those, they give them permission, they're in a public space, the best way to actually make use of that kind of content. So like a real example, let's say someone just celebrated their 5-year anniversary, and they talked about, hey, over the last 5 years, I've experienced tremendous growth. And they're talking about all the wonderful things that happen in your company. If you have a post like that, my recommendation for you is not to kind of hope that AI will find that great post on LinkedIn. It's to take a snippet of that and put that quote on your career site. You can, and then link back to LinkedIn on it. You can put that quote on your built-in profile and then link back to that. And for those of you who are built-in customers, we have a specific feature for this, so you can add snippets. But the TLDR there is really take that good content and put it places that are easily accessible that AI will find, like your career site or built in.
Awesome. So a recurring theme I'm picking up on is when a good story is out there, find all the different places that you can repeat it, and make sure that those are places that AI is also looking for stories. So that makes a lot of sense. As we talk about stories and content development, do I need to think about how content works differently for candidates and for AI? Is there a distinction there?
Sometimes I think our general recommendation is be careful not to take optimization too far. You don't want to do keyword stuffing and those sort of things. Really, you're trying to create answers that really really address the most common candidate questions, and don't make the people or the AI hunt for that information. And so just really simple tips, right? Just like when we're slacking or emailing or writing a presentation, bullets are nice, lists are nice, short paragraphs, short snippets. Regular people like those, AI likes them. It's easier to find. For anything that you're focusing on for creating content, we always say be really specific. And so if you really are making a huge push for AI engineering in your San Francisco office, and you're posting content about someone there, this may sound really basic, but you have to do the basics and say, like, this person is an AI engineer in San Francisco, and talk about that and repeat that. And again, you don't have to keyword stuff, but make sure all the basics are there, and make sure you're very specific about that. And then, like I said, from a structure standpoint, this is really like, as I talked about, like on a LinkedIn Live, on those like subheaders, or that's your career page, use really clear descriptive headings, make the content easy to scan. I would say if you're looking across the page, if you had to just read the headers, would you get all the good stuff from the headers? The answer is no. You're probably burying too much of the good stuff in the paragraphs. And then the kind of the last piece there, as far as like thinking about the candidates and AI, well, both candidates and AI want proof that what you're saying is true. So instead of saying something like, oh, we really invest in career growth, talk about how you do that. Is that mentorships? Is that learning budgets? Is that you have wonderful promotion paths? Talk about like real employee progression, or pull in those real stories. Candidates and AI love it. So I'll say maybe my last tip is clear always beats clever, and specific always beats generic. So focus there.
I love that as a takeaway. I want to pause for a second, check back in with all of you listening, and do another quick poll. So if we don't mind throwing that out there, and really what we're looking at here is what concerns you most about how AI represents your company. And while you are all answering that, I'd like to talk a little bit about what happens when AI gets it wrong. What do we do then?
Yep. So the first question is like trace back. What is that statement? I think Maureen brought up the like a lot of companies will say over the last 12, 18 months, maybe they used to be remote or they used to be hybrid, or maybe they're 5 days a week now. And so it's a pretty factual thing. And so what you'll see sometimes as a candidates are asking, oh, what's it like there? You'll get incorrect information that's inaccurate. And so the question is where is that information coming from? And so how you fix it depends on where it's coming from. So the first step, I think what shocks people often is sometimes they're the source of the inaccurate information. And what I mean by that is, let's say, fast forward or rewind back to COVID, right? You might have posted, on your career site and your articles there, this really long explanation of how like we're going remote first, all this sort of stuff. And what happens is a lot of times, or we're going hybrid, a lot of times AI will find that content because it's on your career site. Um, it'll find out of date content on your ATSs. This happened to us. We're greenhouse clients. And we had outdated information on our greenhouse career job board. And so you want to trace back and find any inaccurate information if it's a surface you control, right? And so that's the first thing. If the information is wrong, is it wrong on a surface that I can control? And is it, fact-based and easily correctable? And so that's where I'd focus there. So obviously the first step is to remove that outdated information. And then really you want to put out more clear information on your career site, on your built-in profile, et cetera. But if you control that surface, delete the information. If that information that is incorrect is not coming from you, really, I would say it goes back to when I was talking about Glassdoor, where you really just have to put out fresh, credible, accurate information and put it in many places. There's no secret to that. That's the kind of core solution to that. But I would say when people are looking at their reputation, really, I think the thing that surprises them how often they actually find out that they are indeed the source of the misinformation.
I know I spent a lot of time updating content and it seems like it's a never ending job. So I can appreciate that. Maureen, any examples you've seen from customers that you want to share?
Yeah, Adam touched on it a little bit, but what's great about our reputation reports is we actually give you the links from your career site as to what's coming up most often. And that's been super helpful for our customers to understand that their own information is actually the one getting cited and where they might need to delete or archive. I'd say the two biggest things that we see come up with this, Adam alluded to it, but it's like definitely workplace policy. Companies were fully remote. They tried to go 5 days and then maybe they reverted back to 3 days. So with policies constantly changing on that, it's hard to keep up with that, we know. And then some other examples that, not to be like doom and gloom on this, but we've seen sometimes where a CEO has, written a letter that was published to a company's site about layoffs that they did. This happened actually for a customer of ours, but it was a letter from 2022. So our contact was like, this is so old. Can we just delete this or archive it? I had no idea it was still getting cited. So just being able to address those little things kind of give you a pulse on what's getting cited, and making sure that everything that's out there is still relevant.
And our poll confirms what you both are saying, which is that people's primary concern is that the information is outdated. It was over 80% of you guys said that. But I think what I'm hearing from both of you is sometimes we might be our own worst enemy here, and we need to figure out where those places might be and go fix what we can control. But then, Adam, tell us a little bit about how those narratives are going to shift over time.
Yeah, I think the most important thing, and so maybe we talked about maybe stuff that policy changes. Sometimes larger events happen, right, at your company, and that creates conflicting narrative. And maybe there's a variety of different things that could have a large impact on your company. And then you feel or you see that tension in the answers about your company. And so the question is like, how do we correct that answer over time? Or how do we correct that answer? And the main thing I'd say, without kind of retreading too many of the last slides, is that really the takeaway is like, you shouldn't, posting one article won't fix it. And let's say you post that one article and you get that information 3 times, and you do that all in one quarter. The most important thing is if you have these major conflicting narratives about your company, that maybe aren't true or fair, or your company's moved past that, is that you kind of need consistency over time. And so establish a cadence to address that. And so if, for example, some sort of event occurred with your leadership team, right? You need to address that. Don't expect it to go away overnight. I think you can make progress quickly, but really focus on consistently touching on those positive narratives again and again. Like I mentioned before, make sure there's a clear theme and make sure there is specific proof.
Wonderful. And I think as we're talking about all these investments we can make in content and sources and all of that, what does AI actually use in terms of content formats?
Yep. So some of the common questions we get is what content formats work? Can it read PDFs? Can it read LinkedIn posts? Can it read YouTube videos? The answer is sometimes it's not super consistent. And so almost touching on that LinkedIn aspect, if you've got that great employee post and you have the permission to share it, you should do that. Don't count on it there. If you've got really great YouTube videos on your career site, can those show up in AI? Yes. Will they always? No. So what would I do? If I have a wonderful career video, I would take that and I would republish on my career site, and I would do it with a transcript. Really, like I was saying before, like simple text is always kind of like tried and true, and that's the best. Simple text in a place that AI can easily find it. The same thing is true with PDFs. I've seen teams that have really great PDFs they put together for candidates that they're going after, and they'll have really great information and talk about all the wonderful stuff. And sometimes they'll post that on their career site, but don't assume that AI can read it. Again, not to be so redundant here, put it in a simple, plain form with clear headings that AI can understand. So take the simple, plain approach and use it many places.
Adam, just one quick technical note that one of our attendees just wanted an answer on that I think ties in nicely here, which is when you're talking about career sites being important, does it mean the career information on our primary site, or does it need to be its own subdomain, for example, like company.com, or sorry, careers.company.com? Does that make
Not
sense?
a huge, yeah, not a huge difference. So like, let's say I'm Pepsi. If my main website is Pepsi and I have careers it's pepsi.com/careers. That doesn't change differently if I made a website that's Pepsi Careers or Pepsi.careers. The most important thing is off your core corporate site, your main brand sites, if you're Pepsi, that in the footer of your website, you just want a link there. Why the footers show up on every page? AI will eventually come to your corporate website. And so just make sure it's easy for it to find its way to your career site. So as long as you do that, you don't have to worry too much about the technical nuances of it's a subdomain, a primary domain, all that good stuff.
Wonderful. Sounds like maybe one less thing for some folks to worry about. They won't have to go establish that separate domain. I just want to jump us down now to talking about attribution and thinking about how we measure what AEO and GEO is doing. So how do we measure the impact of AEO and GEO?
So this one's probably the hardest question. Even the most sophisticated marketers have trouble like truly quantifying it. And that's because AI it's an influence channel. It can be a direct traffic channel. Certainly you can see, and I know many of you who track your career sites diligently and look at where the traffic is coming from. I know a lot of you have seen growth from ChatGPT or Claude, places like that. But really that's kind of just last touch attribution. And here's why it's so challenging to measure, because of how the actual path works, right? So They may discover you in AI, think about you later, Google you. They might then go to your built-in profile after discovering AI. They might go to your LinkedIn profile. They might go directly to your career site, or they might wait 2 more days to do that. In all those sort of cases, AI has had a big influence on that path, but you wouldn't necessarily see that in hard data. So, like I said, traditional attribution, it typically gives credit to that last click. And I know for a lot of us who look in ATSs, that's, we're so used to looking at source attribution, it only captures the last click. And I know a lot of people know that so much happens earlier in that. It's always been that case, right? But really, AI has amplified that many, many times. And so that's kind of the new challenge with AI. And so what I would say is, really, when you're thinking about it, how should you measure, right? If it's really slippery and it's hard, what should you do? So 2 parts. So like as we've been talking about visibility and reputation. So I would use a tool, or like I said, described earlier, how you could kind of write your own prompts, track, are you visible? Do you have good reputation? And as you see those things improve, as you see your visibility improve, and as you see your reputation improve, you should see improvements across your whole career site. So what would you actually look like? So examples that you would look at is, like I mentioned earlier, certainly you should see more career site visits, or you'll see more career site visits directly from AI if you have the technical capability to track that. On the recruitment side, recruiters should see better acceptance rates. I think we mentioned earlier before on that stat, basically anytime someone is thinking about applying to a company, or if they've been reached out to, they'll research that company. So that's gonna be like a key thing to check on. Are my acceptance rates getting better as my reputation is getting better? And that would be kind of when I say acceptance right there, I mean like acceptance from like a cold outbound. That could be like a LinkedIn InMail. That could be a direct email. So I would track those things and look at it. Do those get better as my reputation improves over time? Acceptance rates are a huge aspect there too, right? So as I have a better reputation, candidates trust more that I'm an employer that I would actually want to work with and make a big part of my career. So those are key aspects that I would say. The kind of big takeaways on this one is, don't expect one perfect metric. You're not going to get one silver bullet. Like you can say, oh, I can look in Greenhouse and see I have 22 direct hires from AI. It's kind of never going to show up exactly like that. You have to really look at those visibility, look at those reputation measures, and measure your business outcomes. And so holistically together, that'll help tell you whether your AEO GEO strategy is working.
And Maureen, I have a feeling you've been hearing a similar response and refrain from our customers. What are you hearing there?
Yes, totally. Accurate attribution, I think, has been a topic for our customers for years now, but it's just being even more amplified by AI. I think a good starting point and how we think about this is understanding what is going into the influence before someone decides to apply. So we at Built On now focus a lot of our data around how are we impacting your visibility and reputation off platform, in search and LLM. So you have data around that to be able to say, built-in is being cited X amount of times. We have X amount of impressions off platform because of our content on built-in. So you can help to tell that story, because we know that ATSs are going to be only representative of the last place someone applied from.
Wonderful. Adam, I just want to turn it over to you for one last takeaway. I know a lot of our listeners are trying to do more with less. They're being asked with fewer resources, fewer people to accomplish not just these, but many other goals. Where do you tell people to focus their time and energy?
The first place I would start is with reputation. And I think when we launched this tool too, that's where we started. That's one that you and the HR team have a bit more control over to start immediately. So if you haven't started on reputation, do start there now. It's something that you can make pretty meaningful progress on. We've seen clients make enormous leaps over the last 6 months. So my recommendation is generally start on the reputation side, because it impacts your entire funnel. Once your reputation is good shape, then that would focus a bit more on visibility.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us. Maureen and Adam, thank you for the insights and the information. It was super helpful for me as a marketer, but I know for our listeners as well. And listeners, thank you for joining us. Thank you for submitting all of your great questions that helped us feed this panel discussion today. If you haven't already, you can go get a head start on understanding your AI footprint by getting your free report on the built-in site. And that can give you some insights into your reputation and how companies are being seen today. So you can maybe start down this path that Adam helped us understand today, and that Maureen has been seeing our clients work against for the last year and a half. We really thank you for joining us, and we will see you all again next time.